The sound of gunfire echoed through the streets of Silver Creek as Yates Morrow pressed his back against the saloon wall, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Blood stained his duster, none of it his, but that didn't make it any less damning. 4 men lay dead in the dust, and though they'd drawn first, Yates knew the law might not see it that way. It was 1875 and the West was changing. Law was creeping in, but not fast enough to stop men with grudges and guns. Yates had been riding too long, killing too many, to believe he'd ever know peace. At 32, his dark hair already showed threads of silver at the temples, his hazel eyes permanently narrowed from years of scanning horizons for trouble. "Move on, Morrow," he muttered to himself, holstering his Colt and mounting his chestnut stallion. Always move on. 2 days' hard riding brought him to the foothills of the Rockies. Spring was fighting its way through the last clutches of winter, patches of wildflowers breaking through melting snow. Yates made camp beneath a stand of pines, the silence pressing in on him like a physical weight. Sleep wouldn't come. It never did, not properly. Every twig snap, every rustle of wind had him reaching for his gun. He'd forgotten what it felt like to close his eyes without seeing the faces of men he'd killed. Some deserved it: outlaws, murderers, thieves who'd have killed him without hesitation. Others were just fools who'd drawn against the wrong man. Dawn broke with Yates already in the saddle. He hadn't slept more than an hour, but that wasn't unusual. He rode west, following game trails through increasingly rugged country. By midday, he spotted smoke rising from a small valley below. Curiosity got the better of caution. He guided his horse down a narrow path, emerging into a clearing where a small cabin stood. A well-tended garden stretched beside it, and a few chickens scratched in the dirt. It looked peaceful, foreign. As he approached, the cabin door swung open. Yates's hand instinctively moved to his holster. "If you're thinking of drawing that gun, mister, I'd reconsider." A woman's voice, steady and unafraid, came from the doorway. She stepped into the light, a rifle held confidently in her hands. "State your business." She was perhaps 25, with honey-brown hair tied back in a practical braid. Her dress was simple but clean and well-mended. What struck Yates most were her eyes, clear green, direct, and utterly fearless. "No business," he replied, raising his hands slightly. "Just passing through." "Saw your smoke." The woman studied him, her gaze taking in his trail-worn appearance, the gun at his hip, the hardness in his eyes. "You look half-starved. I've got stew." Yates hesitated. Kindness from strangers wasn't something he encountered often, nor trusted when he did. But his stomach growled, and something in her direct gaze told him she wasn't one for deception. "Much obliged, madam." "Eleanor Caldwell," she corrected. "Not madam, and you are Yates Morrow." Eleanor nodded once, lowering her rifle but not setting it aside. "Tie your horse by the trough. He can rest while you eat." The cabin's interior was small but immaculate. A cast-iron stove gave off welcome heat, and the aroma of simmering meat and vegetables made Yates's mouth water. A curtain partitioned off what he assumed was a sleeping area. Books lined a small shelf unusual in these parts. Eleanor ladled stew into a bowl and placed it before him with a chunk of cornbread. "Eat," she said simply, taking a seat across the rough-hewn table. Yates removed his hat, revealing his prematurely graying hair. "You live out here alone, Miss Caldwell?" "I do now." Her tone discouraged further questions, but after a moment she added, "My father passed last winter, pneumonia." Yates nodded, understanding loss. "It's a fine place, but isolated for a woman alone." A flash of annoyance crossed her face. "I manage just fine, better than in town with people's pity and unwelcome proposals." He couldn't help a small smile. "I believe it." They ate in silence after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. When Yates finished, he stood, reaching for his hat. "Thank you for the meal, best I've had in months." Eleanor studied him. "Night's coming. There's a storm brewing, can smell it in the air. You can sleep in the barn if you'd like." Yates hesitated. Staying in one place too long was dangerous, but the thought of a roof, even a barn roof, was tempting. "That's kind, but it's not kindness," she interrupted. "It's common sense. Only a fool rides into the mountains with weather coming." He couldn't argue with that logic. "The barn, then, thank you." The barn was small but solid, with 2 stalls, one occupied by a dappled mare and a hayloft. Yates unsaddled his horse, brushing him down thoroughly before settling into the loft. Through cracks in the boards, he could see Eleanor moving about the cabin, lighting lamps as darkness fell. The storm hit just after midnight, rain hammering the roof, wind howling through the eaves. Yates lay awake, as always, one hand never far from his gun. He thought about Eleanor Caldwell alone in her cabin. What had brought her to this isolated spot? What kept her here? Women in the West typically sought community, safety, in numbers, but she seemed to prefer solitude, much like himself. Dawn broke with the storm still raging. Yates descended from the loft to find Eleanor in the barn, feeding her mare. She glanced up at him, unsurprised. "Creeks likely flooded the trail you came in on," she said matter-of-factly. "You'll be staying another day, I expect." Yates frowned. "I don't want to impose. It's not an imposition if I invite you." She handed him a bucket. "Make yourself useful. Eggs need collecting." The day passed in a strange domesticity. Yates repaired a leak in the barn roof, split firewood, and helped Eleanor round up a wayward chicken that had escaped its coop. They spoke little, but the silence was companionable. By evening, when they sat at her table eating rabbit stew, Yates realized he'd gone the entire day without reaching for his gun once. "You're running from something," Eleanor said abruptly, setting down her spoon. Yates tensed. "What makes you say that, the way you watch the trail?" "The gun you never take off, even inside, the way you flinch at sudden noises." Her green eyes held his. "I'm not asking what it is, just stating a fact." Yates considered denying it, then shrugged. "Most folks out here are running from something. True enough." She gathered their bowls. "What were you before, whatever you're running from?" He was silent for so long she probably thought he wouldn't answer. "Army, then scout, then..." "He trailed off, hired gun," she suggested. Yates's eyes snapped to hers. "Sometimes when the cause was right." Eleanor nodded, unsurprised. "My father was a judge in St. Louis. He saw too much corruption, spoke against the wrong people. We came here when I was 16. So you're running too." A faint smile touched her lips. "I suppose I am." She stood, moving to the stove to put on water for coffee. "The difference is I stopped running when we got here, found something worth staying for. Peace," Yates said quietly, "something like that." Eleanor poured coffee into 2 tin cups, though it gets mighty quiet sometimes. They sat in silence as the storm continued to rage outside. For the first time in years, Yates felt the constant tension in his shoulders ease slightly. The following morning, the storm had passed. Yates stood in the yard, looking toward the trail. It would be passable by noon. "You could stay another day," Eleanor said from behind him. "Help me fix that chicken coop properly." Yates turned to face her. "Miss Caldwell, Eleanor," she corrected. "Eleanor, I'm grateful for your hospitality, but men like me don't settle, don't get comfortable." "Men like you," she repeated. "You mean killers." The word hit him like a physical blow. "Yes," he said simply. Eleanor didn't flinch. "My father sentenced 12 men to hang during his time on the bench. Does that make him a killer too?" "That's different." "Is it? He did what the law required. I expect you've done what necessity demanded." She stepped closer. "The past is just that, Mr. Morrow. Past." Yates shook his head. "Not in my experience. The past has a way of finding you." Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "Well, if your past comes looking, I've got a spare rifle and good sight lines from the cabin." Despite himself, Yates smiled. "You're an unusual woman, Eleanor Caldwell, so I've been told." She turned back toward the cabin. "At least stay for breakfast before you ride out." Yates knew he should leave immediately. Every instinct honed by years on the run told him to get back on the trail. But something he couldn't quite name kept his feet planted where they were. Breakfast would be welcome, he said finally. One day became 2, then a week. Yates told himself each morning he would leave, but there was always another repair to make, another chore that needed doing. Eleanor never asked him to stay, but she didn't ask him to leave either. They fell into an easy rhythm. Yates slept in the barn, rose at dawn, and worked alongside Eleanor until dusk. They spoke little during the day, but in the evenings, sitting by her fire, conversation came more easily. He learned she could read Latin and Greek, taught by her scholarly father. She played the piano, though there wasn't one for hundreds of miles. She had a dry wit that caught him off guard, making him laugh for the first time in years. In turn, he told her about his childhood in Missouri, his time in the army during the war, the skills he'd learned tracking with Pawnee scouts. He didn't speak of the killing, but she never asked. 2 weeks after his arrival, Yates was repairing the cabin's roof when he saw riders approaching 3 men, moving with purpose. He was down the ladder in an instant, gun drawn. "Eleanor," he called sharply. "Company coming." She emerged from the garden, wiping soil from her hands. Squinting toward the riders, she tensed. "I don't recognize them. Get inside, lock the door." Eleanor disappeared into the cabin, emerging moments later with her rifle. She positioned herself on the porch, the weapon resting casually but ready. The riders approached slowly, taking in the scene. Yates standing in the yard, hand hovering near his holster, Eleanor on the porch with her rifle. "Afternoon," called the lead rider, a burly man with a thick beard. "Looking for a man named Carson. Thomas Carson, heard he might be in these parts." Yates kept his expression neutral. "No Carson here, just me and the lady." The rider's eyes narrowed. "And you are Yates Morrow. This is Miss Caldwell's property." Recognition flickered in the man's eyes at Yates's name. The other riders shifted uneasily. Morrow, the gunman from Kansas. Yates didn't confirm or deny it. "Like I said, no Carson here. Best move on." The lead rider studied him, then Eleanor. "Didn't know Morrow had taken up with a woman." "Mr. Morrow is helping with repairs," Eleanor said coolly. "Now state your business properly or ride on." The 3 men exchanged glances. "Carson owes our boss money, a lot of it. We tracked him to Silver Creek, heard he headed this way." "Haven't seen him," Yates said firmly, "but I'll keep an eye out." The message was clear: leave now. The lead rider seemed to consider pushing further, but something in Yates's stance, or perhaps his reputation, changed his mind. "We'll be moving on then, but if you see Carson." "I'll let him know you're looking," Yates said evenly. The riders departed, casting glances back over their shoulders. Yates watched until they disappeared around the bend, then turned to Eleanor. "I should go," he said quietly. "Those men recognized me. Others will too." Eleanor lowered her rifle. "Is that what you want, to leave?" The question caught him off guard. Want? When had he last considered what he wanted rather than what was necessary? "It's not about want, it's about keeping trouble from your door." "Trouble found my door long before you came along, Mr. Morrow." She stepped down from the porch. "I've handled it thus far." "This is different," he insisted. "Men like that, they'll use anything against you. Anyone." Eleanor stood before him now, her green eyes holding his. "Are you concerned for my safety or afraid to admit you might have found somewhere you want to stay?" Yates opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again. The truth was, he didn't know the answer himself. "Sleep on it," she said finally. "The world won't end if you wait until morning to decide." That night, lying in the hayloft, Yates couldn't sleep. Nothing new there. But for once, it wasn't memories of violence keeping him awake. It was the thought of Eleanor's question. Was he afraid to admit he'd found somewhere he wanted to stay? The moon was high when he heard a scream from the cabin. Yates was through the barn door in seconds, gun drawn, racing toward Eleanor's home. The door was still barred from inside, no break-in. He pounded on it. "Eleanor, open up." Shuffling sounds came from within, then the bar lifted. Eleanor stood in her nightdress, hair loose around her shoulders, eyes wide with residual fear. "What happened?" Yates demanded, scanning the cabin's interior. "Nightmare," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I'm sorry to have alarmed you." Relief flooded him, followed quickly by concern. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. Without thinking, he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Sit," he said gently, guiding her to a chair. "I'll make tea." Eleanor didn't protest, which told him how shaken she truly was. Yates moved around her small kitchen with surprising ease, having watched her prepare tea many times. When the kettle boiled, he poured water over the leaves, letting them steep before handing her a cup. "Thank you," she murmured. After a sip, she added, "It was about my father. The end, when he was sick, I couldn't help him." Yates sat across from her. "I'm sorry, it's foolish. Almost a year now and still." "Grief isn't foolish," he said quietly. "It's just there." She looked up at him. "You've lost someone." It wasn't a question, but he answered anyway. "My younger brother, during the war, he was just 17. Eleanor reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. The simple touch sent an unexpected warmth through him. "I'm sorry, Yates." It was the first time she'd used his first name. He liked how it sounded in her voice. They sat in silence, finishing their tea. When Eleanor stood to return to bed, she hesitated. "Would you?" she began, then stopped, looking embarrassed. "What is it?" "Nothing. It's silly." Yates waited, sensing there was more. "Would you mind sitting with me, just until I fall asleep again?" Her cheeks flushed. The dreams sometimes come back. The request surprised him, but he nodded. "Of course." Eleanor's sleeping area was separated from the main room by a heavy curtain. A narrow bed stood against one wall, neatly made despite her hasty exit. She slipped beneath the quilt, looking suddenly young and vulnerable. Yates sat awkwardly on the room's only chair. "I'll stay right here. Thank you," she whispered, her eyes already growing heavy, "for not thinking me childish." "Never that," he assured her. Within minutes, her breathing deepened. Yates watched her sleep, the moonlight casting soft shadows across her face. She looked peaceful, all the determination and strength that animated her features during the day softened in slumber. He didn't mean to stay all night. He'd planned to return to the barn once he was sure she was deeply asleep. But something about the quiet rhythm of her breathing, the safety of the small cabin, and the strange realization that someone trusted him enough to sleep in his presence kept him in the chair. And for the first time in more years than he could remember, Yates Morrow closed his eyes and truly slept, without nightmares, without waking at every sound, without his hand on his gun. He woke to sunlight streaming through the small window and Eleanor watching him from her bed, a curious expression on her face. "You stayed," she said softly. Yates straightened, embarrassed. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. You were sleeping." Wonder colored her voice. Deeply. He realized she was right. He'd slept through the night, never stirring, never reaching for his weapon. The realization was so startling he couldn't find words. Eleanor sat up, tucking her hair behind her ears. "I've never seen you sleep before. Even when you sit by the fire in the evenings, you just rest with your eyes open like a hawk." Yates stood, feeling strangely exposed. "I should get to the chores." "Yates." Her voice stopped him as he reached for the curtain. "Why don't you sleep?" He could have evaded the question, but something about the night they just shared demanded honesty. "Nightmares and habit. In my line of work, sleeping too soundly gets you killed." Eleanor's expression softened. "But you slept last night." "I did," he admitted, unable to explain why. A smile touched her lips. "Good." Throughout that day, something had changed between them. Small glances held longer, their hands brushed when passing tools. Conversation flowed more easily. By evening, when they sat at her table sharing a meal of roast rabbit, Yates had made his decision. "I'm staying," he said abruptly, "if that's all right with you." Eleanor looked up, surprise giving way to a slow smile. "I'd like that. Those men might come back, others might too. I know, I have enemies. I expected as much." Yates leaned forward. "I can build a proper house. A room of my own added to this one. I wouldn't presume." Eleanor placed her hand over his. "Yates, I'm not concerned about propriety. I haven't been concerned about what people think since we left St. Louis." Her touch was warm, steady. Yates turned his hand beneath hers, threading their fingers together. "I've done things, Eleanor, things that haunt me." "I know," she said simply. "So have most who survive out here. I don't know if I deserve this. Peace." "You," Eleanor squeezed his hand. "Peace isn't something you earn, Yates. It's something you accept when it's offered." That night, she asked him to stay again. This time, there was no nightmare, no pretext, just a simple request, her eyes holding his with quiet certainty. He sat in the chair by her bed, watching as she settled beneath the quilt. "Will you tell me something?" she asked, her voice soft in the darkness. "Something true?" Yates nodded. "If I can. Are you still planning to leave someday when you think it's safe for me?" The question cut to the heart of his fears. "I've been alone a long time, Eleanor. I don't know how to be anything else." She was quiet for a moment. "That's not what I asked," Yates sighed. "No, I don't want to leave, and that terrifies me more than any gunfight." Eleanor's hand emerged from beneath the quilt, reaching for his. He took it, marveling at how small it felt in his calloused palm. "Sleep beside me," she whispered. "Just sleep." Yates hesitated only a moment before removing his boots. Fully clothed except for his gun belt, which he placed within reach, he stretched out atop the quilt beside her. Their bodies didn't touch, but he could feel her warmth, smell the lavender she used to rinse her hair. "Good night, Yates," she murmured, already drifting. "Good night, Eleanor." And for the second night in a row Yates Morrow slept, spring gave way to summer. Yates built a new room onto Eleanor's cabin, a proper bedroom with a large window overlooking the valley. They slept there together each night, sometimes talking until dawn, sometimes just lying in comfortable silence. Often, Eleanor would drift off first, and Yates would watch the gentle rise and fall of her chest until sleep claimed him too. He still had nightmares occasionally, but they came less frequently. When they did, Eleanor would wake with him, holding him until the ghosts receded. Word spread about the gunman who'd settled with the judge's daughter in the High Valley. Some were curious, some wary. A few came seeking Yates's help with troubles: renegade Indians, cattle rustlers, land disputes. He turned them all away. "I'm retired," he would say simply, and send them on their way. Eleanor taught him to read better, correcting his halting progress through the books her father had left behind. In return, he taught her to shoot more accurately, to track game, to read the weather in the clouds. They married in late summer, a simple ceremony performed by a circuit preacher who happened through the valley. Their only witnesses were a family of homesteaders from the next valley over and a passing cattle drive cook who Eleanor had once helped with a persistent cough. That night, lying beside his wife, Yates finally spoke the words he'd been holding back. "I love you," he said softly, the phrase unfamiliar on his tongue. "I think I have since that first morning when you pointed your rifle at me and offered stew in the same breath." Eleanor smiled in the darkness, her hand finding his. "I know, I've been waiting for you to realize it. You could have told me," he said, pulling her closer. "Some things a person needs to discover for themselves." She pressed a kiss to his shoulder. "I love you too, by the way. Have since you sat in that chair all night just because I asked." Autumn came, painting the valley in golds and reds. They harvested the garden, preserved food for winter, and reinforced the barn. At night, with the first snows beginning to dust the mountains, they would sit by the fire, planning for the future. "We should get more cattle in the spring," Eleanor suggested one evening, her head resting against Yates's shoulder. "Start a proper herd, maybe some sheep too," he added. "Good money in wool. And children," she said quietly. Someday, Yates's arm tightened around her. The thought of being a father both terrified and elated him. "Someday," he agreed. "Are you happy, Yates?" Eleanor asked suddenly, lifting her head to look at him. He considered the question seriously. "I'm not sure I knew what happiness was before you, but yes, more than I ever thought possible." The first real test of their peace came with the winter. 3 men, not the ones who'd come looking for Carson, rode into the valley during a break in the snows. Yates was chopping wood when he spotted them. "Eleanor," he called calmly, setting down his axe. She appeared in the doorway, immediately understanding the situation. Without a word, she fetched her rifle and took up position by the cabin window. The riders approached cautiously. Yates recognized the leader, William Foster, a hired gun from Colorado with a reputation for brutality. They'd crossed paths years before, not as enemies, but not as friends either. "Morrow," Foster called, reining in his horse a cautious distance away. "Heard you'd gone domestic." "What brings you to my valley, Foster?" Yates replied evenly, noting with satisfaction the way Foster registered the claim of ownership. "Business. Not with you." Foster nodded toward the mountains. "Payson's outfit is running contraband through the high pass. Army's paying good money for information about their operation." Yates crossed his arms. "And you're sharing this because," Foster shrugged, "thought you might be interested in the work, old time's sake. I'm retired." Foster's eyes flicked to the cabin where Eleanor's rifle barrel was just visible through the window. "So I see," he hesitated. "There's a bounty on Payson, $5,000. It was a substantial sum, enough to buy more land, more cattle, provide for a family." For a brief moment, Yates felt the pull of his old life. Then the cabin door opened and Eleanor stepped onto the porch, rifle held ready but not aimed. "My husband gave you his answer, Mr. Foster." Foster's eyebrows rose at the word husband, but he nodded slowly. "Fair enough." "Thought I'd offer." He gathered his reins. "They'll be moving the goods tonight using the East Trail in case you change your mind." The 3 riders departed, leaving Yates standing in the yard, his thoughts troubled. Eleanor approached, stopping beside him. "You're thinking about it," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. $5,000 would secure our future. Eleanor's gaze was steady. We've been securing our future every day since you decided to stay. With our hands, our work. She paused. But if you feel you need to go, I won't stop you. Yates turned to her, surprised. You wouldn't try to convince me to stay. I didn't marry you to change you, Yates. I married you because I love who you are. She touched his cheek, including the part of you that wants to help even when it's dangerous. Her understanding humbled him. What would you do if you were me? Eleanor considered this seriously. I'd ask myself if the money was worth risking the peace we've found, if stopping these men is worth the chance of becoming the man you were trying to leave behind. Yates pulled her into his arms, breathing in the scent of her hair. When did you get so wise? I've always been wise, she said, a smile in her voice. You were just too busy being brooding and mysterious to notice. That evening, as darkness fell, they sat together by the fire. Eleanor read aloud from one of her father's books while Yates mended a bridle. Outside, snow began to fall again, thick and silent. Yates knew that Payson and his men would be moving through the high pass now, carrying whatever contraband they dealt in whiskey for the Indian reservations perhaps, or stolen army supplies. The bounty hung in his thoughts, not for the money itself, but for what it represented: a return to the life he knew, the skills he'd honed, the man he'd been. Eleanor finished her chapter and closed the book. It's getting late. Yates set aside the bridle. Yes, she studied his face. You're still thinking about Foster's offer. I am, he admitted. Not because I want to go, but because I'm wondering if I'm a coward for staying. Eleanor moved to him, kneeling before his chair. Is it cowardice to choose peace over violence, to choose love over death? She took his hands in hers. The brave choice isn't always the one that risks your life, Yates. Sometimes it's the one that risks your heart. Yates looked into her eyes, seeing all that he'd gained in the month since he'd stumbled upon her cabin. When I met you, he said slowly, I hadn't slept through the night in years. Now I sleep beside you every night, and when I wake, it's to the sound of your breathing, not gunfire. And is that worth more than $5,000? It's worth more than all the money in the world. He lifted her hands to his lips. I'm not going anywhere. Relief softened her features. Good, because I have something to tell you, and I'd hate to have to track you through a snowstorm to do it. Yates raised an eyebrow. What is it? Eleanor took one of his hands and placed it gently on her stomach. We're going to have a child, Yates, in the summer. The world seemed to stop. Yates stared at his hand on her still flat abdomen, then at her face glowing in the firelight. A child, he whispered. You're certain? Eleanor nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I've suspected for a few weeks, now I'm sure. Joy, pure and overwhelming, surged through him, followed immediately by fear. Eleanor, I don't know how to be a father, my own was. He trailed off, unable to articulate the complexity of his childhood. And my father was a judge who sentenced men to death, she reminded him gently. We aren't our parents, Yates, we'll find our own way. He pulled her into his lap, holding her close. A child, he repeated, the word taking on new meaning with each utterance. Our child. That night, with the snow piling high against the cabin walls and the valley locked in winter's embrace, Yates held his wife close beneath the quilts. Her breathing softened as she drifted to sleep. Her head nestled against his shoulder, her hand resting protectively over her abdomen. Yates stayed awake a while longer, not from his old vigilance, but from a new kind of watchfulness, the protection of something precious, something worth far more than any bounty. As sleep finally claimed him, his last thought was that he had found, against all odds, the peace he never thought he deserved. Spring returned to the valley, melting the snow and bringing new life. Eleanor's pregnancy progressed, her body changing daily. Yates found himself constantly amazed, both by the miracle growing within her and by his own unexpected happiness. They expanded the garden, built a proper corral for the cattle they'd purchased, and prepared the small bedroom adjacent to theirs for the baby. Eleanor sewed tiny clothes while Yates crafted a cradle from pine and oak, carved with leaves and stars. Word of Foster's offer had spread. Occasionally, riders would stop by, some with propositions similar to Foster's, others simply curious about the legendary gunman who'd turned homesteader. Yates treated them all the same with cautious hospitality and firm boundaries. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold, Eleanor suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her rounded belly. "What is it?" Yates asked, instantly alarmed. A slow smile spread across her face. "Give me your hand." She placed his palm against her abdomen. For a moment there was nothing. Then he felt a distinct movement, a push against his hand. "Is that?" he began, wonder filling his voice. Eleanor nodded. "Your child saying hello." Yates couldn't speak, overcome by emotion. This tiny life created from their love was real and strong and already making its presence known. "I think it's a boy," Eleanor said softly. "He kicks like you must have, always restless." "Or a girl with her mother's determination," Yates countered, his voice rough with feeling. Eleanor leaned her head against his shoulder. "Either way, he or she will be loved. More than anything in this world," Yates promised. Summer arrived, hot and bright. Eleanor's time grew near, and Yates sent for the midwife from the nearest town, a 3-day ride there and back. The woman arrived, a stern-faced older lady named Mrs. Hollister, who took one look at Eleanor and declared her to be carrying healthy and strong. On a sweltering July evening, Eleanor's labor began. Yates was banished to the porch by Mrs. Hollister, who informed him in no uncertain terms that men are of no use in birthing rooms except to faint and get in the way. For 14 agonizing hours, Yates paced the yard, chopped enough wood for 3 winters, and cleaned the barn to a state it had never known. Each cry from the cabin sent a dagger through his heart. Finally, as dawn broke over the mountains, a new cry joined Eleanor's, the unmistakable wail of a newborn. Yates froze, his heart pounding, until Mrs. Hollister appeared at the door. "You have a daughter, Mr. Morrow," she announced, her stern face softening slightly. "And a wife who's asking for you." Yates entered the cabin on unsteady legs. Eleanor lay in their bed, exhausted but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. She looked up as he approached, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Come meet your daughter," she whispered. Yates sat carefully on the edge of the bed, peering at the tiny, red face nestled among the blankets. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a determined set to her tiny mouth that was pure Eleanor. "She's perfect," he breathed, afraid to touch her, afraid she might break under his calloused, killer's hands. Eleanor understood without words. She took his hand and guided it to their daughter's cheek. "She knows your touch already, from all those nights you spoke to her through my belly." The baby turned her face toward his finger, her lips pursing in sleep. Something inside Yates broke and healed simultaneously, a transformation so profound he could hardly breathe. "What shall we call her?" Eleanor asked. Yates considered for a moment. "Hope," he said finally. "Because that's what she is, what you've both given me." Eleanor smiled tiredly. "Hope Morrow, it's perfect." Mrs. Hollister stayed for a week, teaching Eleanor the finer points of infant care before departing with a generous payment and a promise to return for any future Morrow babies. Yates and Eleanor settled into their new life as parents, the days measured by feedings and diaper changes, the nights by Hope's small sounds in her cradle. Yates discovered in himself a patience he never knew he possessed. He could rock Hope for hours, singing low, tuneless lullabies that nevertheless seemed to soothe her. When she cried, he would walk the floor with her tiny body cradled against his chest, his heart expanding with each day. "You're a natural," Eleanor observed one evening, watching as Yates bathed their daughter in a small tin tub, his massive hands incredibly gentle as they supported her head. "Never thought I'd be good at creating life," he admitted. "Only at taking it," Eleanor touched his shoulder. "People change, Yates. That's the beauty of living." As summer faded into autumn, visitors to their valley became rarer. The passes would soon close with snow, leaving them isolated until spring. Yates welcomed the seclusion, treasuring these months alone with his family. On a crisp October morning, Yates was splitting logs when he spotted a lone rider approaching. He set down his axe, watching warily as the figure drew closer. It was a woman, he realized with surprise. Young, perhaps in her early 20s, riding a weary-looking bay horse. Her clothes were travel-stained, her face drawn with exhaustion. "Hello, the house," she called weakly as she neared. Eleanor emerged from the cabin, Hope bundled against the autumn chill and cradled in one arm. "Welcome, traveler," she called. "Will you join us for a meal?" The young woman practically sagged with relief. "Thank you, madam. I've been riding for days." Yates helped her dismount and took charge of her horse while Eleanor ushered her inside. By the time he'd seen to the animal and entered the cabin, the stranger was seated at their table, a bowl of stew before her, tears streaming down her face. "This is Miss Sarah Jenkins," Eleanor explained, a protective hand on the young woman's shoulder. "She's in some trouble." Sarah looked up, fear evident in her eyes. "I'm sorry to bring this to your door, but I didn't know where else to go. They said in Silver Creek that Yates Morrow lived in this valley, that he might help." Yates sat across from her. "What kind of trouble?" Between sobs and spoonfuls of stew, Sarah's story emerged. She'd been working as a schoolteacher in a mining town 50 miles east when she caught the eye of the mine owner's son. His advances had turned threatening, and when she continued to refuse him, he'd accused her of stealing from the school funds. The town marshal in the mine owner's pocket had given her 24 hours to leave or face arrest. "I have nowhere to go," she finished. "My family's back east." "I came west for the teaching position." Eleanor and Yates exchanged glances. "You're welcome to stay here until you decide what to do next," Eleanor offered. Sarah's relief was palpable. "I can work," she said quickly. "I'm good with children. I could help with the baby." "We'll figure all that out tomorrow," Eleanor assured her. "For now, you need rest." After Sarah had been settled in the small room they used for storage, Eleanor and Yates spoke in low voices by the fire. "We can't turn her away," Eleanor said, though Yates hadn't suggested doing so. "Of course not," he agreed, "but if the marshal comes looking," Eleanor's expression hardened. "Then we'll deal with that when it happens." Yates took her hand. "You know, for someone who values peace, you have a remarkable willingness to fight. Peace isn't the absence of conflict, Yates. It's having something worth fighting for." She glanced toward the cradle where Hope slept. "Someone worth fighting for." Sarah stayed through the winter, becoming an integral part of their small household. She was indeed good with Hope, and her education made her a valuable companion for Eleanor during the long winter months. She taught Yates to read better than Eleanor had managed, her teacher's patience perfect for his occasional frustration. By spring, when the passes cleared, Sarah had made her decision. "I'd like to stay," she told them over breakfast one morning. "If you'll have me, I could teach Hope and any other children who might come along." Eleanor smiled. "We'd be delighted, right, Yates?" Yates nodded, surprised to find he meant it. Their family was growing in ways he'd never anticipated. With Sarah's help, they expanded the garden that spring and added another room to the cabin. Word spread through the nearby valleys about the schoolteacher living with the Morrows, and by summer, 3 children from neighboring homesteads made the journey twice weekly for lessons. Hope grew from infant to toddler, a whirlwind of energy with her father's dark hair and her mother's green eyes. She followed Yates everywhere, helping with chores, demanding stories, and falling asleep against his chest in the evenings. On Hope's 2nd birthday, as they celebrated with a small cake Eleanor had baked, Yates found himself watching his daughter play in the yard, amazed by how completely she'd changed his life. "Penny for your thoughts," Eleanor said, joining him on the porch. Yates put his arm around her, drawing her close. "Just thinking about how different things might have been if I hadn't seen your smoke that day." Eleanor leaned into him. "Do you ever miss it? The excitement, the danger?" "No," he said without hesitation, "not for a moment," and it was true. The life he'd built here, the peace he'd found, was worth more than any thrill his old life had offered. Here, with Eleanor and Hope, he'd discovered something he'd never known he was searching for. That night, after Hope was asleep and Sarah had retired to her room, Yates and Eleanor lay together in their bed, her head on his chest, his arms around her. "I'm with child again," she whispered into the darkness. Joy flooded through him, as powerful as it had been the first time. "When?" "Winter, I think. January, perhaps." Yates pressed a kiss to her hair. "Hope will be a wonderful big sister. She takes after her father in that protecting everyone around her." Yates chuckled. "And her stubborn determination is all you, my love." Eleanor propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him in the moonlight streaming through their window. "Are you happy, Yates? Truly happy with this life we've built?" He reached up to touch her cheek. I never knew such happiness was possible. I thought men like me didn't get this kind of life, family, home, peace. What changed your mind? Yates thought back to that first night when Eleanor had asked him to sit by her bed when he'd watched her sleep and found himself drifting off as well. You fell asleep beside me, he said simply. And for the first time in more years than I could remember, I slept too, not the half-sleep of a man expecting trouble, but real rest. He pulled her close again. That's when I knew this could be home. Eleanor settled against him, her breathing slowing as sleep claimed her. Yates remained awake a while longer, listening to the night sounds of their valley, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft whicker of horses in the barn, Hope's gentle breathing from her room, and most precious of all, the steady rhythm of Eleanor's heart against his. As he finally drifted into sleep, Yates Morrow, once the most feared gunman west of the Mississippi, now husband, father, and homesteader, knew with absolute certainty that he had found the peace he never thought he deserved, and it was sweeter than anything he could have imagined.